Welcome to the Kiwimana Buzz.
Welcome to the Kiwimana Buzz. This is episode 81 of our beekeeping podcast. And my name is Gary, and along with my partner Margaret, we produce this podcast from the hills of the Waitaku Ranges in West Auckland, New Zealand. And our podcast is about beekeeping, gardening, and a bit of political issues about environmental things, especially when it affects our beautiful honeybees. And we also get the chance to speak to some fantastic guests. And so if this is your first visit to the show, please check out our past catalogue and you'll see some great interviews there with some leading voices in the beekeeping world. And this week is no exception. We've got Rusty Burlew from Olympia in Washington State, and she's the voice behind the fantastic Honeybee Suite blog. And Olympia is the capital of the Washington State in America, and it's up there on the West Coast near Seattle. And for all you Nirvana fans, Olympia is the city where Kurt Cobain was living when he wrote Nirvana's Nevermind album. So there's a bit of trivia there for you. And executive producers of this show is Graham Mander from Auckland. And you can follow him on Twitter under Grasmit. So check him out, follow him along there. And I hope you're getting well from your operation, Graham. We heard you've been in a hospital, so get well soon there, Graham. It's awesome. And thanks for all your help in the past. As you spoke in the past, Rusty is a beekeeper and blogger from Olympia in Washington. She also runs the very popular Honeybee Suite blog for over 6 years. Rusty is also the director of the Native Bee Conservancy, a non-profit organisation dedicated to the education about wild pollinators. So Rusty, tell us more about the Native Bee Conservancy.
The Native Bee Conservancy is just a small nonprofit corporation. We're registered in the state of Washington, and mostly we use it to teach children about bees and other pollinators. I've talked to schools and scout troops, places like that, but I've also talked to senior citizens and garden clubs. So even though kind of had children in mind, I'll talk to anybody who wants to listen.
That's good, yeah.
We've installed pollinator walls in a couple of places, including a scout camp, and we've designed pollinator gardens for schools. So we're just small. We work locally. We don't have a lot of money, but we do what we can, and it's certainly fun. I enjoy it.
Absolutely. And if people want to can they people leave donations in that for you?
Yeah, I don't have the donation site set up on Native Bee Conservancy right now, but it's kind of complicated. All my time and effort goes into my Honeybee Suite site, and I get donations there, and I often use them for the Native Bee Conservancy. I just have to get myself more organized one of these days.
Oh, no worries, it's fine. And how did you get started in beekeeping?
Well, actually, it was my grandfather that started me. He was a woodsman and a hunter. He lived in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. It's actually part of Appalachia. And every spring and summer, he would make rounds to all the different bee trees. Because back then, the wild bees just lived in the trees, and they lived year after year. So we would go around to the bee trees, and he would collect honey. He would always just take a little bit of honey from each one to make sure that they could survive until the next year. And I started going with him probably when I was about 3 years old. And I did it for years, and it was like the highlight of my year. I was afraid of the bees for a long time, but I loved being in the woods, and I loved walking, and of course I loved the honey. Later, when I went to college, I majored in agronomic crops, and at that time I worked for a plant breeder, and he was a specialist in alfalfa and clover cultivars that he was developing. And so once again I got thrown into the beekeeping because we needed a lot of bees when we planted out the different cultivars to pollinate them. And then life kind of intervened, but I started keeping bees really more deliberately about 10 years ago. And then I wrote my master's thesis about the effects of pesticides on larval development. So that really got me thrown into it again. And right after I finished that, then I started my website.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and that's the famous Honey Bee Suite, isn't it?
Honeybee Sweet, yeah.
It's a fantastic blog, and I've been following it probably since you started, so it's really great. You know, your thesis is interesting. Is it okay to have a download link on our podcast about that?
Oh, sure. Actually, my thesis is on my website.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can have a read of that.
It's there, and yeah, it was mostly a what they call a literature review, where I took just hundreds of different papers and put them together and tried to extract from them what was actually going on. And as far as the larva goes, because we usually talk about insecticides killing live bees, and LD50 and things like that are all premised on the idea of how many live bees or adult bees we're going to kill. But the larval stages are also greatly affected, and that isn't studied as much, and it's not reflected in those numbers. So it was a really interesting study.
Yeah, absolutely. The pesticides are causing issues for the young bees, and it's not. A lot of studies don't record that at all, especially the ones for the recent neonicotinoids.
Right.
So your grandfather used to collect the wild honey. So any other members of your family are involved in beekeeping today?
No, none. Actually, my husband is very helpful, and he will help me lift things, and that's usually what I need him for, his muscles.
Yeah.
But he's allergic to a lot of things, and he's had anaphylactic shocks, not from honeybees, but from other things. So I kind of keep him away from the hives. He very graciously helps me, and I keep an EpiPen right there, but I would rather he not do it if possible.
Oh, absolutely. It's not worth the risk, is it?
No, it's not worth it. And so if he does help me, I suit him up really good, and I put on his suit and I tape him every which way, just so he doesn't get stung. And so far, we're doing good.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And do you have any funny beekeeping experiences you'd like to share?
Well, Gary, the funniest thing that ever happened to me, I think, as far as beekeeping, was when I worked at a state prison. I taught beekeeping in a state prison for 2 or 3 years. And anyway, my very first day, my very first time, I was assigned these 2 inmates to work with. And they came out, they get patted down, and then they get turned over to me. And they're these great, big, huge, burly guys with lots of tattoos and hair, and really, really scary looking. And they look like they must have worked out 18 hours a day. They had these huge muscles, and I used to think that they needed all those muscles to carry around the chips on their shoulders, because they really had an attitude. They were sullen and sarcastic, real pieces of work. But anyway, so of course, when we start out, they're much too macho to put on the bee suits. They're not scared of anything, especially something a girl can do. So I just shrugged him off, and I said, okay, we're going to open the hives. And the hives that they had over there hadn't been opened all winter. No one was caring for them. So they were totally glued together. So I had to get the lids off. And of course, I don't have a hive tool, because in a prison, a hive tool is considered a weapon. So you don't get hive tools.
God, that must make it hard.
Well, I couldn't get the lids off, Yeah. And so these guys who they could have picked up the whole thing and thrown it across the yard, but they just stood there and watched me struggle with this. So I had to get creative. So I picked up a rock, and I stuffed it inside my gloves. And then I took my glove and I slammed it against the side of the lid, the edge of the lid, to try to break the propolis seal under there. Well, it actually worked. But you can imagine the state that the bees were in. So I knew when I took off the lid what was going to happen. And it did. The bees just exploded out of there. They were so angry. So the next thing I know, my macho inmates are running across the prison yard. And they're running and hopping and cussing, and they're trying to pull on their bee suits, and they're scared to death. Well, it was really funny. So all this commotion brings the prison guard. Well, he's in a great big shiny black car, and all flashing lights and sirens, and he's driving across the grass right towards me. So finally he stops, and he wants to talk to me. but he won't roll down his window. So I can see him trying to talk, and I'm signaling, roll down your window.
Yeah.
But he won't. Finally, he cracks it about a centimeter, just enough to talk a little bit. And he says, "Do you have a problem?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't have a problem." And I signaled to the guys over there, and I said, "Well, it's going to get worse here because this is only the first hive, and I've got 4 to go." So that scared him. He rolled up that window again, and he bailed out of there. I never saw that guy again in the 3 years I worked there. I never saw him again. But my inmates, they were fine after that. They all of a sudden they were polite and well behaved, and I had no problems after that.
Yeah.
Actually,
they saw the strength of the bees, didn't they?
Yeah, well, and I actually got to really like those guys, and they're sort of like nothing like they appear, but they have to kind of put on this, I guess, image of the tough guy image. But once they started working with the bees, it completely changed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
Fantastic. No, that's really great. I mean, there's a lot of programs around the world for people helping, like doing beekeeping in prisons. So I think it's a great thing, and yeah, I guess it would relax them as well, with working with the bees.
Yeah, I think it's really good for them, and I think they loved it, and I loved working with them. I actually kind of miss doing it. It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's funny that you brought them to you made them run away.
It's funny seeing it.
Absolutely. And so, what excites you, Rusty, about beekeeping?
Well, I think the best part about beekeeping is there's always something new. I mean, you never know it all, and it never gets boring. And plus, you get to do it outside. So I think all those things are really good. People in modern societies, especially people in the urban and suburban areas, are really disconnected from the natural world, I think. We go to the grocery store and buy food in a plastic container and never know where it comes from, things like that. So I notice when I'm working with new beekeepers, they often, for example, won't even know what pollen is. But all of a sudden, a few weeks later, they're out there trying to learn about the pollen plants. And if they were never worried about the weather before, all of a sudden they're concerned about, cold snaps and droughts and heat waves, things like that. So even other creatures, all of a sudden someone will say, well, is that bird going to eat my bees? Or is that spider going to eat my bees? And so it broadens people's awareness of the environment. And I think that is really cool. And when I'm working with new beekeepers, I like to see that transition. It always makes me feel good to see them all of a sudden care about the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can't really be a beekeeper without being an environmentalist, can you?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great. And the other thing is you suddenly have this ability to know when a plant's going to flower, don't you?
Right. You learn all kinds of things that you never even thought about before. I mean, even as an agronomist, I didn't think about all the things that I think about now as a beekeeper. I think it's changed me quite a bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure you've learned a lot with your writing your blog as well. So, what do you think's the secret to have such a successful blog?
Hard work.
Yeah.
I don't really know. People say content is king when they're talking about blogs, but when I look at my blog, I don't think the content is that different from anybody else's content. I think it's more about maybe the style of presentation, or people say it's the way I write or my attitude towards things, but I don't know. It actually mystifies me. When I first started blogging, I remember one day, this is like the second month, I had 40 visitors in one day. And I swear, it kept me awake that night thinking, who are these people and why do they even care? I just couldn't imagine why anybody would want to read it. But
yeah.
But it's really grown since then, so.
You know, it's a great blog. So what can you summarize your beekeeping philosophy, and what message are you trying to send to your readers?
I just have to think about that for a second. I think I want to give my readers options for beekeeping. Every beekeeper is different, and I try to keep that in mind. And everyone lives in a different climate with different forage and different beekeeping challenges. But those aren't the only differences. Each beekeeper has different amounts of money, let's say, or different amounts of time and knowledge, education. All those things are different. So it's really important to me that readers realize that they don't have to fit in a predefined mold, or they don't have to keep their bees in a prescribed method, not even my method. I think that I want them to have options and feel that they can design their way of keeping bees, one that fits their beliefs and their resources. So, I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's great because, the thing is, a lot of people don't realise that beekeeping is all local, isn't it? So, everything's different, and
yeah,
things that you experience, near in Washington is be different to what we experience.
Right, and as I said, it's not only the external environment, but it's the internal environment too. Some people have a lot of money to spend on this. Some people are doing it on a shoestring. And so when I give answers, I try to say, try to figure out where they're coming from, and there's probably a way to do it. Of course there's a way to do it. You just have to figure out what it is. And then too is that honeybees are really skilled at adapting to our human frailties. They can accept what we do pretty much no matter what it is, but sometimes we need help accepting ourselves and saying, it's okay that this happened, or it's okay to do it this way. I want people to grow into it rather than think that you have to do it this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Bees are a lot better at being bees than we are, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think the other thing is that people need to, you adapt things that you see. Like, for example, your quilt levels. That's something that we used here. So we tried it we saw that on your site, and we tested it, and we tried it for a season, and we think, yeah, this does work here, because obviously we get a lot of rain as well, and you must get a lot of rain as well.
Yeah, we get a lot here.
That's what you were saying. Yeah, so things like that, we have a similar environment, so we can do things that other people do, but just try stuff out on a small scale, and see how it works for you, I guess. Because they might not work in the middle of a desert sort of thing.
Right. And I do believe in just trying it. Sometimes people say, well, will this work? And try it and find out, because a lot of beekeeping is just seeing what works in your location with your bees and your forage. I don't believe you can go to a book and read the recipe and end up with successful bees. And that's what I keep trying to tell people over and over again. you're not going to find directions that say step 1, step 2, step 3 and have the whole thing work out.
Absolutely. And if you are, it's probably lies anyway, isn't it? Because it just doesn't work like that. Bees aren't like a recipe. I think, the best thing is to read multiple sources and then try and work out what works for you and try stuff out on a small scale. Absolutely. No, that's good. And how do you stay motivated? Rusty? Because you're very prolific with your blog. You must put out a post every few days, I'd say. And how do you stay motivated with that?
Well, actually, that's the easy part. My readers keep me motivated. You have no idea. The amount of the volume of mail that I get is just incredible. And they ask me these questions, and these questions keep me thinking. And also they send me things. articles, links, and photos, and ideas, and stories, all kinds of things. And I often think, oh, that'll make a good post. Or, I'll look into that. But they also send me, things. I've received honey supers, books, seeds, movies, honey. Imagine sending me honey. Jewelry, donations, of course. But, and also I've received all kinds of help. For example, right now I have a beekeeper / graphic designer who's drawing up some new logos for my site. And in the past, I've had people type up spreadsheets, and I get all kinds of support. The funniest thing I ever received was last year. I went down to the post office, and there's this great big cardboard box, and it's full of syringes. And I'm not kidding. It's full of syringes, and I brought it home, and my shed could have passed for a needle exchange. I mean, they were all sizes and shapes, and unbelievable. Anyway, the note inside was from a nurse, and she says, I wanted you to have these syringes, and you can test which ones are best for applying oxalic acid.
Oh, okay.
So you knew there had to be a connection.
Yeah.
So I think that's where most of my motivation comes from. There's all these just so much input. And many of the readers, and you said so yourself, many of the readers have been with me for the entire 6 years. So a lot of people, they're like old friends. They're like family, even though I've never met them. Sometimes when they comment, I just know what they're going to say before they say it, because I'm used to them, you know.
Okay, no, just saying you do get a lot of feedback, and it's really fantastic that your audience is there and reading everything. Okay, it just must be really motivating to get that.
I do go out too sometimes in the summer. I go out on trips, what I call bee trips, and I just drive to different places. I've gone down to Corvallis, that's in Oregon, or different places, Canada, and just meet beekeepers and talk to people and take pictures and make notes. And I can come back from a trip like that with just a whole notebook full of ideas of posts. So I do keep tons of records of just ideas, things. So if I have a day and I can't think of a post, I just go into my notebooks, and usually something comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're very, very great photographer as well, aren't you? I love the photos on your site. Really good.
Yeah, I used to take photos for a newspaper, actually, so I had some practice in taking photographs, although I had to learn how to do macro photography, because these guys are, way different than taking pictures of somebody shaking hands or something. So, but it's fun. I really enjoy it, and when I get good pictures, I just can't wait to post them, to share with people.
Absolutely. No, they're really great. And so if you could travel back in time, Rusty, to before you started beekeeping, what's one thing you'd advise yourself?
Don't start a blog.
A lot of people say that. It's quite surprising.
It eats up your life. But no, seriously, I guess I would spend, if I had to go back to the beginning, I would spend more time learning about the local plants, when they bloom, what blooms and when they bloom, because I think that, if a nectar flow catches you unaware, that's really a big lost opportunity. You can lose a whole crop of honey by not paying attention. And so it's one thing that I always tell beekeepers, that they don't even know what a nectar flow is when they're beginning, and it's kind of hard to explain that it's something that you want to be ready for before it happens. You don't want it to happen and then think, gee, I ought to put on honey supers or something. So.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of beekeeping is all about matching the workforce to the flow, isn't it?
Right. And, of course, when you're a beginner, you tend to raise the bees on the flow instead of raising the bees for the flow. And that takes a while to understand that concept. And not only do you have to understand the concept, but you have to be ready for it and say, I think the flow is going to happen on this day, so I need to back up, 4 weeks or 8 weeks and do these things to my hive in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of beekeeping is trying to anticipate what's going to happen, eh?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why, people say, oh, my bees just swarmed. They go, well, did they have queen cells last week or 2 weeks ago? I think...
I don't know.
There's things you can look for, eh? But yeah, that's the problem. They haven't opened the hive for 3 months and they're surprised they swarm.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And so do you Do you think that, this, we hear a lot about neonicotinoids in the media and the press. Do you think that's the biggest issue facing bees at the moment?
No. The entrepreneur and writer Seth Godin says we're all in the fashion business. No matter what you do for a living, you're in a fashion business. And that you can sell anything to anybody as long as it's fashionable. And in my mind, it's fashionable to blame everything on neonics. And I don't really think that's logical in a way. When you look back at the history of pesticides, a lot of the pesticides we had in the past are much, much worse than what we have today. I mean, farm workers used to die from exposures to paraquat and dieldrin, some of those really nasties, and they were hard on the environment too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sad thing is many of those were developed to replace DDT. And on the scale of pesticides, DDT was considered only moderately harmful to honeybees. They almost had a bit of a resistance to it. And it was actually amazing how well it worked with honeybees. But DDT was banned because basically we abused it. We sprayed it everywhere. We sprayed it on ball fields and playgrounds and golf courses and picnic areas. I mean, we sprayed it everywhere to the point that it was harming the birds and frogs and other wildlife. Is really sad what happened. I believe if we hadn't abused DDT, we might still be using it. And if we were still using it, the bees would be better off than they are now. So the chemical companies they're not going to go out of business, and they're very smart. And so they know that there's a possibility that neonics could get banned at any point. So you can bet they're working day and night on developing the next, great family of pesticides. My point here is that I would be afraid of banning neonics until I knew what the chemical companies have in their back pocket. It could be something worse than what we have now. It could be worse for the bees or worse for the environment. So when we banned DDT, we got the organophosphates, which were much more toxic. And so the question I have is, if we ban neonics, could we end up in a worse place? And it actually kind of worries me, because sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees, or history repeats itself, and maybe we'll end up with something where we wish we had the neonics back again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we interviewed Tom Fairbowl about this similar issue, he was thinking it's really a failure of the regulators.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say next, is that what I think is that more rigorous testing and better registration requirements rather than outright bans might be the answer. And they're doing all this R&D. They're always developing the new ones. And so I think they actually don't mind if we all go out and spend millions of dollars trying to, let's say, ban clothianidin or something. They know that our money is going there. In the meantime, they can develop 3 or 4 or 5 more to take its place, and then start all over again. And now we have to raise all this money again to fight them, and meanwhile they're selling this stuff left and right. So I think it's sort of a game almost, and I would be very wary of doing anything that leaves an opening for them to make even a more dangerous chemical.
Yeah,
anyway.
So probably to best, like in America, probably try and petition the EPA to have stronger regulations.
Stronger regulation. I think that's the way to go. Have better testing protocol. Right now we don't have any testing for how these chemicals interact with each other, and sometimes those effects are worse than individuals. And so I think we need to do more testing along that area. How do the insecticides react with the fungicides, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. It's a combination. You've got if you test one pesticide, you're not testing with everything else in the environment, like with the fungicides, as you say, and other pesticides, and so it could be a cocktail, couldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I mean, when we interviewed Randy Oliver, he was saying the similar thing that we should just ban all pesticides. because they're all as bad as each other, probably. It's not one specific class. So
Yeah, I think it's a waste of money to go after individual chemicals when there's always going to be another one. Better to go after the testing and the registration, that kind of thing.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, sort of, it's kind of the horse and the gate, isn't it?
Right.
Keep the gatekeepers check these pesticides a lot more than they were in the past. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading Rachel Cousins' book at the moment. Have you read that book?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't finished it, so I can't comment on the whole thing. But she's got some. I mean, it's a different period of time, but I think she was a lot of her stuff influenced the EPA, didn't it, back in the day?
It did. She didn't try to. She didn't really advocate banning of pesticides because she understood the importance of them in certain. There are applications for pesticides that are important, but her thing too was regulation and control of how these things are used and how they're approved, rather than an outright ban. She was very, very bright woman, and her book is really just incredible, incredibly insightful for the times, especially.
Yeah, I think she, as you say, she was a very brave lady, and she got a lot of bad press, at the time, didn't she?
Oh, she did. She did.
So no, it's a really great book, everyone out there, because it's not very much now. You can get it from Amazon for like $3 or something. So
oh yeah,
it's well worth reading. I mean, a lot of it's still relevant today. Similar things and similar issues we're facing today, I think, with regulators. So absolutely.
But to go back to your original question, I think the biggest threat to honeybees is still the Varroa mite. Because they weaken the bees, and then once the bees are weakened, they're more susceptible to these diseases and pesticides. So I would definitely put the Varroa mite as my first choice for bad guy.
Yeah, I think so. I think they, yeah, absolutely. They make them more susceptible to viruses and diseases, and yeah, so absolutely. And what do you treat your Varroa mites with, or do you treat it all?
I try to always, I do treat, and I try to use one of the organic acids like thymol or oxalic acid or Hopguard. I don't use the synthetic chemicals. I've never have, and I get by with. I only treat once a year, but I treat with one of those, and I try to rotate them every year, so it's always a different one.
Oh,
and then in the spring I split and requeen so that I have brood breaks on all my hives. So I do the brood breaks in the spring and then one of the treatments in the fall, just like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when the oxalic acid, is that a dribble method? Because you mentioned before about the syringes.
Yeah,
a dribble method.
I'm doing a dribble method. Everybody keeps telling me I should try the vapor. I don't, because I don't know. My beehives, it's really funny. My beehives are on steep hills, and this is the only place I have to put them. And I have and I don't want to carry anything up there I don't have to carry up. And people tell me I need a battery for the vaporizers, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, we actually sell the units here, and yeah, what we use is like a small alarm battery. So it's really small. It weighs less than half a kilogram. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You don't need to buy one of those huge car batteries, because the little gel alarm batteries, and you can do about 12 hives with it.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, I'll drop you an email later with the photo of it. I'm sure you can get them in America. I think they use them in like alarms and things like that, like a small battery. Yeah, those huge car batteries are.
Yeah, people always tell me, "Oh, you just hook it up to a car battery," and I think, "Well, no, I'm not taking a car battery up that hill. No way."
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's okay for a lot of commercial guys. They can drive their truck right up to the beehives, But no, this is much easier. Especially if you've only got a few hives. If you've got 300 hives, it'd be different. But
yeah, I don't have very many hives, so.
No, exactly. And what do you think the biggest mistake you see a lot of beekeepers making these days?
You mean like new beekeepers?
Yeah, mainly new beekeepers. Yeah.
The thing that I see over and over again is that new beekeepers don't take Varroa mites seriously. They'll say things like, "Well, my colony's brand new, so I probably don't have to worry about mites yet," or I looked for mites, I don't see any mites, so I must not have any. And this is just, to me, it's kind of like, if I'm not going to look for a problem, then it won't be there. Whenever one of those new ones tells me that his bees don't have any mites, I always say, well, how did you test for them?
Yeah.
And they'll always say, well, I didn't test because I didn't see any, which is kind of circular, because you're not going to see them if you don't test for them, you know? So I think that I think I understand why this happens. It's because there's so much to learn when you're a new beekeeper just about the bees, that trying to learn about mites is just like, it seems insurmountable. But you have to take them seriously right from the beginning, or you're going to lose your hives. That's
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I know I think it was Randy Oliver said that if you're a beekeeper, you're also a mite keeper.
Right.
You know, and a lot of people, I get, that annoys me the most when someone goes, "Oh, I've got no mites in my hive," and I go, "How do you know that?" And they go, "Oh, because I can't see them."
Exactly what I'm saying. Right.
If you can generally see them walking across the comb, it's probably too late, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing, that people learn how to count mites. You know, I mean, I know it's not the most exciting thing, but you've got to see that trend happening, eh?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because mites keep multiplying. They don't decrease by themselves.
Right.
I've never struck that anyway.
They're not going to just go away, so.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing that I think I see, well, new beekeepers do, and this is even more basic. Nearly everyone who's going to keep bees starts out by reading a book about beekeeping. And to me, this is the totally wrong approach. I want to say, no, the first book you read should be about bees, biology, bee biology. Because if you know how the bees work, you know, how they eat, how they breathe, how they walk, how they fly, if you understand the bees, then the hive manipulations start to make sense. A lot of beekeepers want to know what to do. When should I, move my boxes? When should I do this? When should I do that? Without actually knowing what's going on inside. And that's just mysterious. I mean, it doesn't make sense to people if they don't understand the bees. So I would always say learn bees first, and then learn beekeeping. Just yesterday, someone wrote to me, and they said that they had to rotate their brood boxes right away, and could I tell them how to do it? And I wrote back and I said, well, what are you trying to accomplish, rotating your boxes right now? And he wrote back and he said, well, my mentor told me to. And my mentor told me to is not a reason, as far as I can tell. I think newbies are out there juggling frames and juggling boxes and moving things around without actually having any idea why they're doing it. So, like I said, learn bees, then learn beekeeping. And by the way, if your mentor doesn't give you a reason or can't give you a reason for doing something, then you need a new mentor. Because there's reasons that we do things. We don't just do things because the calendar says so.
No, absolutely. Because the thing is, the calendar doesn't necessarily match the seasons, does it? Not all the time. No,
and everything is different, every little location is different. Olympia is different than the guys up in Seattle. Everything is different. So, plus, I just don't ever believe in doing anything if I don't know why. I'm one of those people, if the directions say, on a container, don't do such and such, I'm apt to do it if they don't tell me why, just to see why I shouldn't have done it. Because I just hate directions that don't tell me why.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I mean, it's probably your scientific background, coming out. You've got to test every theory and theorem sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. You've got to know, learn a lot about the bees, and that the more you learn about the bee biology, the better a beekeeper you'll become, I think.
Yeah, and then things start to make sense. Lots of times people go, "Oh, I get it. I always wondered why I was supposed to do that."
That's right. And basic things like you can't keep a growing colony in one single box for the whole season. They expand, and then they subtract and expand, and
Yeah, and that whole thing about the population in the colony, about it getting bigger and getting smaller, and how it's seasonal. Beekeepers, new beekeepers, don't seem to understand that at all. They don't understand when they're getting bigger and when they're getting smaller, and it's before they think. They start getting smaller before they think they ought to, or they'll say, "Well, I've got 5 dead bees on my landing board. What am I going to do? 5 dead bees? That's nothing."
That's nothing. No, if it's 5,000 dead bees, I'd be
different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you experience the questions you get from beginners all the time, and some of them are, quite amazing.
Yeah, I try to always take them seriously and always answer the questions, but at the end of the day, I kind of think back and think, wow, I can't believe someone's keeping bees and doesn't know that. And I would never say that to someone who I'm answering, but it does occur to me.
Oh, well, we sometimes get people, because we sell beekeeping supplies, and we sometimes get people that wonder how much honey they produce in winter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I go, I think you need to read a book.
Right.
And there's not much producing of nectar over winter. It's a lot, it might be some, but it's not like summer, and there's different seasons, and,
Right.
And I think a lot of people, they want the world where you can just turn a tap and get the honey. And, I know that's a reality now, but, I think it's just, there's more to it than turning taps, eh?
Right.
Absolutely. And so what's your plans for the beekeeping season this year? I mean, obviously you're coming into winter now, eh?
Right. Well, I don't really, since I started my blog, I don't really keep bees for honey so much. I don't really keep them for pollination. Mostly what I do is I keep them so I can do these little experiments. And I don't mean like scientifically controlled studies like what Randy does, but just little try-its. So I'll hear about a new method or a new piece of equipment, or I'll read about something I've never tried before. And so I make a list of these things, and then I try to try them. By trying them, then when people ask me about them, I can answer. And also it gives me a lot of things to write about. So I always have a little list of try-its for the next year. Lately, I've been working a lot on honey supers, so I've had, comb honey supers, so I've had like 10 different kinds and brands and, different models and styles, and I use them and then just write about them. Well, this one worked and this one didn't, and this is why I think this one is better, or how this one could be improved, that kind of thing. So I look for things to do that'll keep me posting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you recently posted about Tony's idea about having the entrances on each super. How did you find that?
Yeah, that was Anthony Planakis. That's who that was. Anthony Planakis. He used to be a detective in the New York City police. Anyway, yes, that is definitely on my try it list. He has he used 2 brood boxes, and above that he put a queen excluder, and then above that he had like 5 or 6 honey supers, and the bees were coming. Each of these had their own hole, and he had a little porch on them too. And he used this as an answer to get the bees to go through the queen excluder, because you know how sometimes bees don't want to go through the excluder, and it takes a lot of encouragement to get them to do that. So he put all these entrances, and he had just unbelievable amount of honey that he collected by doing that. So I want to try that, only mine will be comb honey supers rather than, extracting supers. And so I want to do that exact same style and see if it works, because it is hard sometimes to get the bees to draw out the comb honey supers, especially if they're the squares or something like that. And I thought, well, maybe Anthony's idea of putting entrances up there in each one might actually encourage them. So we'll see, and I will write about it so you'll know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we briefly talked to Tony about it. So, he's an interesting guy. Yeah, I'm going to try and get him on the show one day. So it'll be interesting to talk to him.
When I worked in a prison, I used to take articles about him that used to appear in the New York Times. And every once in a while, he was in the New York Times. And I used to take those articles to the prison and show those guys, because I always thought what Tony did was so interesting. And then, I don't know, I think he started following my site when we were both in that book. We were both interviewed for a book. And I think that's when he first discovered my site. And so we've been kind of communicating quite a bit ever since. He's a really interesting person. Yeah,
absolutely. And so if people want to get in touch with you or follow you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, actually, through my website is the best way to contact me, because I work on it just about every day. And so that's where I am. I also have accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest, but really all my time is on the website. So questions that come in there get priority. So that would be the best place.
Absolutely. It's a great blog. So I encourage everyone to look at it. Have a look. Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Rusty, for coming on the show. It's really great to finally get you on the show. It's been a few years we've been trying, so it's been really fantastic that you've managed to come along. And
2.5 years I put you off.
Yeah.
So.
It's fine. And just thank you from the beekeeping world, all the effort you put into your blog. I think it's a very fantastic blog, and I really appreciate all the work you do.
Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, that was great. I really appreciate Rusty coming along today, and I really think she's a fantastic person and beekeeper. So I really encourage you to check out her blog at honeybeesweet.com and sign up for the newsletter and say Kiwi Mana sent you. That'd be awesome. And she's always got some great articles there, so I really enjoy reading a lot of her stuff. And we have shared her articles in the past, and they've been very popular amongst our readers. If you get a chance over the next couple of weeks, if you could do one thing for us, it would be awesome if you could leave a review on iTunes if you're an iTunes user, or if you've got an Apple device, you can do that on the podcast app. If you could leave a review and ratings for our podcast, it really helps build our audiences around the world. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 82, so I hope you can join us for that. And also, subscribe to us on iTunes as well, so you make sure the podcast arrives into your device automatically. Anyway, thanks guys for listening. It's been a long show, but I really appreciate you taking the time to come along and listen. Have a great weekend, and thanks a lot for coming and listening to our show. Thank you.